Hello and welcome to the MFM Reaper channel. The Mercury 4 template's already made. You just need to download it and put it in your FXZONE folder and you're ready to go. I'm just going to show you how it's laid out. It's the same way I lay all my keyboards out. I'll be making a few videos on the other keyboards that I'm using. If you don't know what CSI is, I'll leave a link in the description below. Now I'll show you how comprehensively it can control any keyboard, in this instance the Mercury 4. First, I'm going to set the channel to auto record by opposite clicking on the record button and selecting automatic record arm. Now, as soon as the track's unselected, I can't accidentally record onto it. This is an overview of the MCU and a couple of keyboards. At the top there, I've really magnified the display so you can see exactly what's going on. How I'm opening the plugins on a selected channel, I press the plugin button. Yeah, I called it the Jupiter 4, there wasn't enough space for Jupiter. Open the plugin by pressing the rotary, the first one, and you're into the FXZONE, which is the file that you've downloaded. Feel free to edit the name. Using modifiers, we're going to be able to access all the parameters of the synthesizer in easy to remember banks. A handy tip about the Mercury 4, if you hold the command key and use the left and right buttons, you can go up and down the internal presets. And using MIDI with the SL25 in the middle there and some of the Reaper actions, I can also go up and down the presets I've made. Without any modifiers, this is the first page, and it's laid out like this. Basic controls of the oscillators or VCOs. Start from the left. The select button selects the wave shape. There's no actual volume control for the oscillator on the Mercury 4, so I've also assigned the fader to select the shape, though this would normally control the volume. On-offs for this parameter and any others are always on the record arms. There isn't one on the Mercury 4. If there's a high-pass filter, this is where it'll be. Then frequency, keyboard, resonance, envelope and output are always in the same place, whatever keyboard. I think these are the essential sound sculpting parameters. And as a rule, volumes and important parameters like this are always on the first page. Because of the way the displays work, faders and rotaries don't work on the same page. Shift is the modifier that accesses the rotaries and all their buttons. This makes it simpler to use, and I'll explain more in a moment. Let's have a look at the first modified page, which is accessed by the control button. This page goes into a little bit more detail of oscillator 1 on the left-hand side of the page. The Mercury 4 is not that complicated, so it's pretty much a repeat of the basic first page. Selecting the shape with the select button, and that also being available on the fader. Channel 2 is pulse width for oscillator 1. Because that's stepped, I can use the select button as well. Any parameter on a fader that is stepped on the keyboard, the select button will be programmed to step through all of those parameters. Now on the right hand side, we've got the VCF controls, attack, decay, sustain, release, and VCF velocity there on the left. The VCF parameters are always on the control modifier. It doesn't matter how many VCOs or oscillators there are. This will always be on the control modifier. The alt modifier relates to VCO2 or oscillator 2. There isn't one on this keyboard. And then the attack, decay, sustain and release of the VCAs in the same position as they were on the other page of the VCFs. You'll also find VCA volume and VCA velocity on 3 and 4 if the keyboard has them. Try and think of this as a verbal manual and it might numb the pain a little bit. This is how I lay out this keyboard and all the other keyboards. Once you've learnt the parameters, you can really play with this stuff. Control and Alt would show you VCO3 or oscillator 3. There isn't one on this plugin, so we can skip that. The option modifier accesses all the LFOs for a keyboard. On the left, there's shape, channel 1. Rate on channel 2. I'll just turn the rate up a little bit and then start affecting. Let's try the VCA modulation. Shapes on channel 1. Because that's stepped, I can use select or the fader. Any on-offs are always on the record arm button, and it's the same for the synchronize button there at the top of channel 2. On channel 3, the Lfo Delay works like an attack time, a pause before the actual effect comes in. In this instance, the parameter numbers range from 0 to 1. It varies from plugin to plugin. I have found that audio units generally work from 1000 down to 0, even when you're working on a parameter that's in dBs on your screen on the plugin. VSTs will generally work to whatever the plugin's working to, and VST3s often have more parameters that you can edit. One issue with working with the old MCU is there aren't lights on any of the modifiers, so it's difficult to know which one is which. But in the plugin zone, I've already compensated for that. So Control will light up the marker light. Alt will light up the nudge light. Option will light up the drop light. And Shift will light up the zoom light. You can actually use the buttons as well. But it makes it a lot easier to understand where you are if you've got lights to understand that. I think the XT has lights on the modifier buttons anyway. As I mentioned at the beginning, at the moment we're only using the faders and the buttons that go with the faders. We've not been able to access the rotaries and the buttons that go with the rotaries. I've assigned Shift to do that. So Shift with no modifiers will show you all the keyboard voicings. And as with the faders, if there's a step parameter, you can use the select button. Saves you cranking the rotary around from 0 to 127 or whatever. And then if there's an on-off, noise in this case is on-off. It's not a parameter you rotate through. That'll be on the record arm buttons, same with the faders. Right, I've just talked over that, so let's have a listen to what that actually does in the keyboard. I press Shift, and these are your options. Detune Voices. I can step through how many voices. Poly 1 selected, Poly 2 selected, monophonic, and unison monophonic, unison 2, and noise I can't turn up and down on a volume, it's either on or off, it's a switch. Let's use the control modifier. We know that that was oscillator 1 and all of the VCFs. But while that modifier is pressed, you can also add Shift to that so we can access the rotaries and buttons for that. And that gives us the sub-oscillator. In this case, it's just an on and off, or the rotary would turn through the volume of it. Octave, it's called range on the actual keyboard, and there's 4 steps to that. So I could turn the rotary, or I can just simply press select to choose all 4 of those. Stereo width is on rotary 7. Some synths have stereo width built into them. I've used Ensemble to create the stereo width in this. So there's the rotary turning the percentage up, and the on-off is directly below on the record arm button. It's a little bit of a dull sound. I think if I go and increase the frequency and get a slightly brighter sound. And then I'll come back and change the octave as well. Let's bring it higher up. Using the Alt modifier, that took us into the VCO2 or oscillator 2, and all of the VCAs, attack, decay, sustain, release, and the volume and velocity. So if I add Shift to that, nothing to think about. We haven't got two oscillators, so there's nothing to put in there. We used option for all of the LFOs relating to the mod wheel. We're able to adjust all those parameters. Shift and option shows you the controls for the pitch wheel, including glide or glissando, transpose and drift. Drift is like the digital version of if you owned an analog keyboard, how many times you might have dropped it. Lots of drift sounds like you'll have dropped it a lot. No drift sounds like you've kept it in the case. The same parameters are adjusted here with the pitch bend wheel for the VCO, the VCF, VCA. And they're also in the same positions as they were on the LFO bank. The rotaries define how much, and the select buttons select where to, LFO, off, or bend for the VCO, VCF, and VCA. You can also adjust the sensitivity to give you a larger range. The sensitivity is referred to as PB amount on the MCU, the fourth one in. Glide speed can vary a lot from keyboard to keyboard. Often a huge amount will happen in the first 3 or 4 steps. This is really evenly spread. And as usual, the on-off for that is directly below, making it sound like it's been chucked down the stairs a couple of times is easily achieved with the drift. Transpose using the select, or you could use the rotary. The last 2 banks of parameters are not least, actually my favourite, the Arpeggiator and the effects. And to access those, it's all of the modifiers except shift. And you can see all the controls for your Arpeggiator there. There isn't an ARP on and off on this keyboard, on 1. On 2 there's the ARP speed. The on-off button at the top there will synchronise it. After that you've got your pattern, up and down, random on the buttons. The next on-off button relates to top note. This is how you get more octaves. You just choose a top note and that will be how many octaves your arpeggio plays over. Encode, hold, sample and hold fader on 7, and next to that I've copied the envelope control into that. They're quite interesting to mix next to each other. We add shift to all 3 modifiers, then that's going to give us access to our effects. In this case, I've got reverb at the last 3. The on-off is obviously underneath the reverb decay. You can adjust the time there. Next to that is the dampening. Reverb mix on rotary out with the last 3 selects, choosing the different types of reverb. On channel 1 you're on off and your rotary for the input level. Rotary 4, selecting the different modules. I'll let you them properly in a second. I'll just turn the delay feedback down on rotary 2. Rotary 3 is time. Underneath the on-off switch is the synchronise button. Let's see the different modules. A good variety of delays from mono to really stereo wide. Record arm 6, turn the reverb back on. Bring it back in the mix a little. It's a lot easier to use than it is to hear me talking about. I hope you have a lot of fun with it. and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.